Alright, this is the video that you have been waiting for. Rescript and React. How can we use them together? Let's find out. To make our lives easier, the Rescript team has made a React Rescript template that we can just use. It's called Create Rescript App. Let's try that. So we can just copy this and paste it in our terminal. I'm using PNPM, but you can use whatever you want. So we're going to create a stopwatch app today. So let's name it Stopwatch Rescript. And we're going to use the one with React. And we definitely want Rescript core standard library. Alright, it's ready. Let's take a look at the contents. So we have our bsconfig.json. We also have the package.json here, complete with commands that we need. We have some README here to tell you how to run it. We also have other configuration files, like in this example, this is using Tailwind and Vite. And we have our index.html. On the source folder, we have the assets and some CSS file, some REST file, the main.res file, and that's it. We can begin to start coding. In the new terminal, I am going to start a Rescript compiler. And I'm also going to start a Vite dev server. So we can take a look at localhost 5173. And if we play around with this example code, we can see that the count is updating. Let's try to edit src/appres to test the fast refresh. And we can see that it is working. Now we're ready for the real thing. So what we are going to build today is a stopwatch app. I got this idea from the Geeks to Geeks website. If you're interested, you can see how the JavaScript code is implemented here. Alright, let's get back to our Rescript code. So first, we're going to delete everything. This is not a Tailwind tutorial, and I am not a Tailwind expert, but I already prepared some Tailwind code to make this app looks decent enough, so I can just copy-paste the Tailwind code here. Alright, we see something on the window, but it's nothing there. Now we want to create our timer component. Let's take a look at the structure of our code. I'm going to create a components tier here that contains all of my components. One thing that you need to remember when creating a React component, if you want a fast refresh, you need to create a resi file. So here I'm going to create a resi file for the timer. For the resi file, it's very simple. You just have to expose your top level component function. Alright, let's start coding the timer. I'm going to create another component called digit, and we can just pass the digit 1, digit 2, digit 3 to the digit itself. Let's write the resi file for digit. So the digit will receive a digit as string. Also a class name. I already know I need a class name. And it's going to return JSX element. Let's code the digit. Unlike JavaScript, in order to have a text element inside a JSX, you need to use react.string function. Okay, so now let's use this digit component. Okay, so now let's use this timer component in our app.res. Let's actually not use the time yet. Okay, so we are seeing our stopwatch counter. Now let's create some buttons. I'll make a button component here. Now I'm going to create a controls component. I am going to have 3 buttons here. That is start, reset, and resume or pause. And the set of buttons will be different depending on whether the stopwatch is active or not. Let's make the start button first. Okay, I need a class name in the button itself. Okay, button found in 2 directories, src and src components. Okay, the compiler is failing to compile because button found in 2 directories, src, src/components. File names must be unique per project. Yes, so Rescript file names must be unique per project. We're going to discuss about this in future videos where we're going to tackle bigger Rescript project. For now, let me remove the button file that I don't need. Okay, so let's recompile again. So we have our controls. Let's start using it in our app.res. There you go. Now we have our start button. Let's code the rest of the buttons. Don't forget that we can use regular Rescript code in our JSX. For now, let's make isPause to true. I am going to also add another variable called isActive. And depending on whether the stopwatch is active or not, we can show the start button or the active buttons. Okay, so now we have our reset and resume buttons. We also have our start button. If I change this to false, you can see that we have our start button. And if I change isPause to false, we have our pause button. Nice. Now it's time to code the logic. If you're familiar with how to develop React, then you must know the definition of smart components and dumb components. So I want all my components in the folder components to be dumb components. I want the app.res to be the smart component. So we are going to manage the state on the app.res. First, we are going to manage isActive and isPaused. The difference between Rescript React and JavaScript React is that in order to use the state, you must use the function syntax. So you cannot just say like this. This will not work. The compiler will complain. So as you can see here, this has type bool, but somewhere wanted unit that returns a weekly type A. Basically, what it wants is it just wants you to use the function. So Rescript will not complain when we do this. And we want to control the isPos variable. I want the beginning state of this to be true. Now let's control the time. I'm just going to use this one. Okay, so now let's wire some of the buttons. When start button is clicked, I want isActive to be true and isPos to be false. Same rule, when you are doing the setter, you have to use the function syntax. You cannot just use this, because Rescript will complain. It says this has type bool, but somewhere wanted bool to bool. Okay, so it wants you to use the function syntax. The callback here will receive the previous value of that variable, but since I'm not using it, I'm just gonna use underscore to signify that. I want isPos to be false. Now let's make the other two functions to handle pause and reset. We're going to pass all of this variable and these three functions into controls. Now Rescript is complaining that the field active does not belong to type controls.props. That's because we haven't edited the function signature. Let's do that. I'm just going to copy this into the control.res. So we can delete the isActive and isPos binding here. I want to pass all the callbacks above to all of these functions. So we have an error that says onClick does not belong to type button props. As usual, we're going to change the function signature to accept onClick. Apparently, I have a typo here on pause resume lick. That is wrong. Alright, that seems to work. So let's try the button first. Looks like it's working. Hooray! Now it's time to code the stopwatch logic. As you might have guessed, we have to use React useEffect for this. Let's take a look at the documentation first, because I want to show you something. In here, we have the documentation for Rescript React. Let's take a look at useEffect. We can see here that it has the basic usage and nothing too strange. It's everything that you expect. However, there is useEffect 0 and useEffect 1, useEffect 2, and so on until useEffect 7. So what does this mean? This documentation explains that. If you use useEffect, this thing runs after every completed render. If you're using useEffect 0, it only runs once right after mounting the component. So it is the same as using React useEffect in the JavaScript land, but with an empty array. If you use useEffect 1, it will run every time prop1 has changed. So it's the same as in the JavaScript land you use React useEffect but with one item in the array. And for useEffect2, it runs every time prop1 or prop2 has changed. So it is the same as React useEffect, but you have two items in the array. Then what is the difference between React useEffect1 and useEffect2? The difference is useEffect1 is used when you have an array with the same type of elements. But if you have dependencies that are not of the same type, you have to use useEffect2, useEffect3, and so on. This is because in JavaScript, you can have different item types in an array, but you cannot do that in Rescript. You need to have only one type of item in the array. Now back to the code. We're going to use React useEffect1. Why? Because we have two dependencies here, that is isActive and isPos. Both of them are of the same type, which is Boolean. So we can use React useEffect1. And I'm going to create an interval here. We can use the ref object. Let me just write this code first and I'll explain it to you. Okay, so we have an interval object here, and we are going to use the ref syntax from Rescript. At start, the interval can be none, so we use option, and we say the interval is none. And the type of the object is interval ID. When isActive is true and isPos is false, we want to start an interval. So we are going to use setInterval function, and we pass it a callback that runs every 10 milliseconds. And every 10 milliseconds, we want to update the time variable plus 10. Now, setInterval function returns an interval ID, and we are going to wrap it in sum because the ref here has option type. And remember, with option type, you can only have none or some. And we assign it to the ref using the syntax right here. Else, and we don't care what else is here, whether it's true and true, or whether it's false and false, or whether it's false and true, we don't care. We just say that we want to read from the interval contents, and if it has the interval ID, we're going to use the function clearInterval to clear that interval. Otherwise, we don't do anything. We just return a unit type. Alright, so let's see what the compiler says. The compiler gives us an error. It says this has type unit, but somewhere wanted option unit to unit. Okay, what does that mean? If we see the pattern matching right here, what is the type of this pattern matching? If we take a look, the type is actually unit type because the assigning expression here is actually of type unit, and clearInterval is also type unit, and this one is also type unit. That's why this whole switch statement is of type unit. But that's not what the callback function that useEffect1 has wants. This callback function doesn't want a return type of unit. So what does it want? If we take a look at the compiler error, it says it wants option type with a callback that receives a unit type and returns a unit type. Okay, let's just try to satisfy that. First, it wants an option type. So we have this option type here. It wants the option type to be of a callback that receives a unit type, which is nothing, and return a unit type. So let's try to return a unit type like this. It's working. Riscrypt compiler doesn't complain anymore. That means our code satisfies the type check. But what can we put here actually? If you remember the lesson from React-Len, sometimes you have to put your cleanup code in a callback function. This is where you're going to put it. In our case, we are going to clear the interval. So let's write the code to clear the interval. We already have it, so we can just copy paste it. Okay, Riscrypt still type check, and Riscrypt just gives us a warning saying that the time variable is not being used. Aha! Thank you, Riscrypt. Now I know that I forget something. Let's use the time variable. We're going to put the time variable into the timer, of course. And we're going to change the timer function signature. Now we can finally use it. I'm going to write a helper module to help me format this time value. I'm going to make another directory called utils, and I will say the file name is formatter. I'll make this quick for you because I already know what type of code I want to put here. But I copied this directly from Geeks2Geeks and translated it to Riscrypt. If you want to see the original code, just visit Geeks4Geeks. Now I have my helper function, and I am going to just use placeholder and currying to help me create another 3 functions. If you're not familiar with this syntax, go ahead and visit my pipes video. I am going to just expose these 3 functions and not the format function. So I'm going to write the resi file. Okay, so now let's use the functions. We still have one thing to take care of. Riscrypt says that class name is unused. Okay. Aha. Oops, I have my code wrong here. Okay, so Riscrypt stops complaining at last. Now let's see whether this is working or not. Alright, so we have our stopwatch app in Riscrypt. What do you think of the overall experience? I think it's pretty good. It's very comfortable. The developer experience is amazing. Riscrypt type system is amazing. And it just works. I encourage you to try it yourself and let me down below in the comments of what do you think of the whole experience for you. This is a long video, but I think it's really worth it. I'll see you next time as we build more and more things in Riscrypt. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you.